We're excited to speak with you all today on one of my very favorite topics. We spoke a few years ago, I co-presented a few years ago on the Full Living Building Challenge, and today I'm excited to present about the CORE rating, which is by the same organization, the International Living Futures Institute. And it's a much more streamlined and accessible version of a green building rating system that's still pretty tough to do, but it's a lot easier than the Full Living Building Challenge. And Helene, Lefkowitz, and I are going to tell you more about that today. So we'll go into a little bit about us just so you can get some context. Go through the CORE, the overview of CORE, the 10 core imperatives, and then we'll talk about the zero energy and carbon certifications, which are also products of the ILFI, and hopefully we'll have some good time for Q&A after that. So as Johnny mentioned, I'm the president, and Helene Lefkowitz is a sustainability project manager who's been with us for 3 years. Formerly, she was with the CSU's Institute for the Built Environment, and she is a sustainability project manager. She's also a Living Futures accreditation, which is important for this rating system. So we're proud of our zero net energy projects and our platinum and gold projects. We just added another platinum today, so that makes 21, and a bunch more golds on a big project. And we're also doing more and more with different rating systems that are more appropriate for the project and the client. So we're trying to diversify our rating systems. We're doing a lot of Living Building Challenge and other rating systems as well. And we're excited to see a lot more RFPs going out for zero net energy projects, especially in California, but in other states as well, including in Colorado. We've been certified alphabet soup, I would say, since our inception, which is helpful to working on a lot of public agency projects. We're excited about the CORE Green Building Certification Program because it directly aligns with our vision of resilient and regenerative buildings. And our business certifications, we are certified with Colorado Healthy Links as a healthy business, with Certifiably Green Denver, which shows that we're a green business, and with the JUST program as a socially responsible business. I'll elaborate more on the JUST system later because it's actually one of CORE's 10 imperatives. Our building, which is in Denver, our headquarters, is in a LEED Gold certified building, and it's a WELL Silver certified office space. It's on the Aurora Higher Education campus. It's the Metro State University's Aerospace and Engineering Sciences building. We're on the top floor of the building as a public-private partnership. So that means we get to bring on interns and work with professors on classes and do lots of fun things with the university there. Next slide. So our major sectors, you can see that we do a lot of different kinds of projects. In Boulder, we've been working on the Google Pearl Place project, as well as 333 Walnut renovated project. We also sometimes do get pulled into large residential projects, sort of pursuing certifications like LBC, or they might have a particular energy problem they're trying to solve. And just our services, we have 3 core teams. Helene will talk about how what we're talking about today relates to some of our service offerings, but our main 3 core teams are commissioning, sustainability, and building performance. So now we'll go into CORE and just a little bit of history of the ILFI. They've been producing things since 2006 with the Living Building Challenge, and they're a nonprofit working on ecological minded, they're trying to build a restorative world for all people. So the Living Building Challenge has been one of basically the premier top green building rating system for a long time. They have 6 certification programs and 3 transparency labels: Declare, Just, Reveal. I put the Reveal one in there because I was interested in the energy performance label. So if you just demonstrate your energy performance, you can get a Reveal label. It also helps with meeting the 2030 challenge for projects. And also the Living Community Challenge is an interesting one that is for whole communities, a lot of schools, higher ed facilities, other places with multiple buildings. But I did notice that they also have pilot city programs. So Bend, Oregon, and San Francisco are experimenting with the Living Community Challenge as part of a city pilot, which City of Boulder might be a good candidate for. Declare is about is another system for products. And the interesting about the reason why core was developed was because of, if you see this project drawdown, the book drawdown is by Paul Hawkins, identified 100 different things we should do to reduce the impacts of climate change. Living Building Challenge didn't make the list, but it was mentioned as this is a coming attraction because it doesn't quite meet the it's too hard. Basically, it's not accessible to most people. And because of that, that was one of the imperatives for why they decided that they needed to kind of make the requirements of LBC a little easier to do, and they developed the core rating system as a result of that. And then the ILFI certifications for specific to buildings and sort of the ease in which and the requirements at which they are kind of go up over time. With you can get a pedal certification, or the core is a little easier than the pedal certification. I will be talking about the last two, is the core zero carbon and zero energy as well. Next slide. And I think Helene is going to take over from here.
Yep. So in the last slide, you could see that core was kind of in the middle of that hierarchy of stepping up, to show that, as Renee mentioned, that core was really developed to be sort of address the gap in between going for full living building challenge, and then between the gap of what's called mainstream green building rating systems, right? So if you are familiar with LEED or lots of other rating systems, even LEED Platinum, there's a lot of great projects that come out and are doing important things with LEED Platinum. If you want something that's above and beyond that, Living Building Challenge is a little too prohibitive for you. That's where core comes in. It was developed to be scalable and accessible, really to address the impact of climate change from the building industry. And ILFI describes it as the 10 best practice achievements to redefine what a green building can really be. And it's also important to note that it is performance-based certification. So there's you need to gather a full year of data before you would get certified. One of the things I'm really excited about core is that it really breaks that barrier of some of our most common rating systems, that a lot of the strategies are helping us do less harm, which is important, but they're not encouraging projects teams to go over that hump to providing positive impact. And it's not just to our environment, it's to our local economies, it's to our communities, our social systems. So within that, there are several project types for core. You can see here it's applicable for new construction, existing buildings, interior projects, and along the bottom there, those of you interested in it for single family residences, campuses, healthcare, commercial buildings, it is applicable. And similar to Living Building Challenge, core uses what ILFI calls transects. These are basically a nomenclature to show where your project is located geographically. And some of the imperatives will have slight modifications on their requirements so that they're more appropriate for your location. So for example, I'm guessing that Boulder mostly would probably be at an L3 or L4 transect. And so in these imperatives, as you're diving into them, you would see some specific requirements based on that. Core also utilizes scale jumping. So this is basically a terminology to be able to take advantage of other technologies or systems that are happening outside of your project boundary. So for example, in the picture here, you can see that this project with a blue roof, they have a small project boundary and they can't put their own stormwater treatment site within their boundary. And so they're able to scale jump and take advantage of stormwater treatment that's going on a nearby site. So that concept is applicable for some of these imperatives. So as Renee mentioned, that core was developed to be more accessible, a little bit easier. The way that they've done that is, you'll see on the left is the Living Building Challenge imperatives, and there's 20 of them. Core only includes 10, so they cut that in half. And it's not new imperatives, they're just taking what they see as the most potent imperatives to still be making that positive impact. And that's what they've included. So you'll notice things like, you know, for full Living Building Challenge certification, net positive water, net positive energy, those are requirements. Those have been taken out of core. So you'll see that there are requirements for significant reductions in energy and water use, but you don't have to be net positive. Similar to materials, the red list requirement is not part of core. They have other criteria to help make sure that our projects are being intentional with our material selection, but not to go so far as to require red list. All right, so before I dive into the details of the 10 core imperatives, if you haven't already, I would love for you to grab a notebook, open up a new note window on your phone, whatever it might be. And as Renee and I are talking through the imperatives, I'd like you to think about a project that you're working on right now, so that we can try to ground this in something that's applicable to what you're doing. So think of a project you're working on now. If that's not relevant to you, you know, you can think of your house or a building nearby, just something that feels familiar and well known. And I'm going to ask you, as we're going through this, to think about, you know, what imperatives can you see being applicable for that project or for that location? And how do these regenerative design strategies inspire you? What do they bring up for you? What are you getting excited about? And we'll circle back around on that at the end of the presentation. So I want to hear all your thoughts. So let's dive in. The first imperative, ecology of place. This is basically the notion that we as human beings can leave a place better than we found it because we are involved. Because we are putting a building there, it's actually enhancing the ecosystem, enhancing social systems and the local economy. So in order to do this, you first have to be building on a previously developed site. You have to do a pretty in-depth site assessment. So you want to look at the ecological systems that were pre-colonial, understand what is native to that area, and as appropriate, restore that for that site. And then in addition to the site assessment, you also need to look at the social and cultural equity factors. So you can think of that as really getting to know the community that your project is going to be in. So it's not just about making sure that, again, there's environmental benefits from a project, but that we're also deeply understanding the community where we're building and providing benefit to them as well. A cool example of this is the Chesapeake Bay Brock Environmental Center. So this is, it's an education center in the Bay Area. And before this project was built, the area was very polluted from dredge from local waterways. And when the team was doing their in-depth site assessment, they discovered that this area has natural flooding tendencies. And so you can see that the building was intentionally built on pylons to allow that natural flooding to occur, because that's vital to that ecosystem and making sure that it flourishes. And so the floods that come through, the water can soak back into the soil, and it won't structurally bring any harm to the building itself. Right, the next imperative, human scaled living. Some of you might recognize this location. It's Larimer Square in Denver. Great example of a built environment that is designed around human beings, around human-powered transportation. And this imperative is kind of taking a well-used planning process of planning for the car first and flipping that on its head, right? So it has this inverted triangle where it's basically saying that when you're planning your project, that we're thinking about people first. We're thinking about those non-fossil fuel transportation uses, and we're prioritizing that and then working our way down that triangle. So to do this, the requirements are, just going to point out a few of these, to think about how you can reduce single occupancy vehicle travel to your site, providing space for community gathering. They focus a lot on both minimizing and improving any impervious surface parking. So you'll have limits of how much parking there can be for your site area. And then depending on the size of parking, you may need to break that up with planted areas. And then you can see kind of some familiar strategies of EV charging stations and bike storage. And then this one does differ if it's single family home. They ask you still maintain or increase the density, and then you need to implement 2 strategies to show that you're planning for a transportation impact reduction. And with that, Renee, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
So the theme is fit for purpose water. So we don't need to use potable water, for example, which is a precious resource for irrigation, for example. Next slide. So the interesting thing about this credit, it's not called credit anymore. It's called help me out.
Imperative.
Imperative. Thank you. This imperative is that this has always been a challenge in Colorado, and it's one of the reasons why there hasn't been more living building projects in Colorado. Well, fortunately, there's a project that's made some headway called the Pikes Peak Summit Complex, and it was able to achieve this credit, which the main concern here is the stormwater on site and not having any potable water used for irrigation. But the Pikes Peak was able to get an exception to use municipal water supply for potable and non-potable water, mostly due to the extreme circumstances in which they're in, but also the project was still required to minimize potable water use for only things necessary for health and safety, and to also do advocacy for rainwater capture. They also had to basically have a system capable of using rainwater harvesting and a space allocated for future water treatment in case of regulatory changes in the future. So I think we can work through this in Colorado. I wanted to also highlight a project that's not pursuing the Living Building Challenge, but it's really made a lot of headway, which could potentially lead to others pursuing this. And that is Denver Water Operations Complex redevelopment, specifically the administration building. And it's using something called One Water. And One Water is basically an efficient use of water to use it where you need it and reuse it. You're still connected to the utility, but you try to minimize the potable water usage as much as possible. The interesting things about this project are a sizable rainwater collection system that is being used for irrigation purposes, as well as an ecological wastewater treatment system. You can see the plantings in the lobby there. That's the final stage of wastewater treatment for this building, being used for irrigation and also for the restrooms. So it was a long haul and a lot of processes and procedures, legal discussions, water engineers involved to get this approved. And it's fantastic that it's opened as of last year. This project, it's also pursuing, it's also just achieved today, LEED Platinum, and as well as zero net energy. So we're excited about this as a potential for future projects to be able to pursue living building challenge as well as core. And the energy requirements for core have been lowered as compared to the earlier version of LBC to be a little bit more accessible to project teams. Though, as you can see in the requirements, it's still, still not easy. You still have to save, 70% on energy, and you really can't use any combustion. There are some exceptions to that combustion rule, such as existing building systems, existing district energy systems, and process loads. But really, you can use the renewable energy towards that 70%. But it used to be 100% on site. So they've lowered it to 70%. And then existing buildings is 50%, interior 35%. And it's really more accessible, I'd say. Next slide. For carbon, you do have to demonstrate a 20% savings in carbon, embodied carbon. So that's the materials in a building, which is possible to do. You need to use the embodied carbon and construction calculator, or EC3, to establish product baselines and identify how to save that 20%. And it's really on the major system. So we're talking the foundations, the structure, and the enclosure. You are also required to select low carbon interior materials for other things like carpet, ceiling tile, and gypboard, which you can also do through the EC3 website, which identifies it compares EPDs and the carbon usage for different products. So you can select the conservative to the achievable thresholds to meet that requirement. And Helene.
All right. Okay, I'm gonna pick up here with our next imperative, healthy interior environment. So this is, the well-known statistic that we spend well over 90% of our time now indoors. So let's make sure that our indoor air quality is the best it can be. To do this, projects will need to comply with ASHRAE 62, and that's whatever the most current version is. You'll also need to develop a healthy indoor environment plan, and that addresses 3 main factors of cleaning, particulate prevention, so that's like your walk-off mats and vestibules, as well as other strategies to improve the air quality. That can be things like increased ventilation or using particular filters. You also need to provide daylight and views for 75% of those regularly occupied spaces. And then, of course, prohibit smoking and have exhaust in certain areas. All right, our next imperative, responsible materials. So as I mentioned before, this is an area where they've really maintained the integrity of this imperative, but have really scaled back the requirements. And they still want to make sure that project teams are prioritizing transparency in their materials, understanding the human and environmental impacts of our materials. So there's a couple different sections of requirements. The first one is really about what kind of products you're putting in your building. And so these first 3 bullets is how they're kind of getting around requiring the red list. So if you use a certain amount of products that have a declare label, and I'll show you that in a second on the next slide, what that means, as well as at least 1 living building product, that they're, because those products have been vetted, they know that those are going to be healthy materials in your project. They're not going to be emitting those toxins and gases. And then beyond that, they want to make sure that you're responsibly sourcing materials such as wood and looking for local materials. So their sort of regional threshold is about 300 miles. And then you'll notice diverting 80% of construction waste, which is not quite, net zero waste, but it's still a high percentage there. So the materials transparency labels, Declare and Living Product Challenge. Declare is ILFI's process of vetting materials for what's in them, where are they coming from, and what happens to them when they're done being used. So if you see a product that has this label, you know that it's going to be safe to use in your project. And the Living Product Challenge is a really cool, it's a whole other certification that manufacturers can get for their product. And it basically says that your product is providing positive impact, that it's not providing harm, to the environment or the communities or the economy. So if you haven't checked those out before, I would look into that. They're pretty cool. And there's an easy to use database to search for products as well. All right, our next imperative, universal access. So this is making sure that everybody, no matter what their abilities are, can access your site and get enjoyment from it. So some of these requirements are a little more subjective, and it's up to the project team to show ILFI how you're meeting these. So this first one right here, enhance the public realm. you know, that's up to you to be creative in how you want to do that. And this goes back to the ecology of place imperative too. If you're doing that cultural assessment and really understanding the community you're in, there are going to be those things that naturally pop up that you're going to be able to implement to enhance that public realm. You need to do ADA as well as show that you're meeting the 7 principles of universal design. And then there's some additional requirements to make sure that your building isn't actually causing any harm to your neighbors. So you have to show that adjacent properties aren't being exposed to any emissions or noise, as well as showing that you're not giving any negative impacts from shading. So this is a quick view of the principles of universal design. I wanted to show these because they're not commonly included in our projects, but you can see on the left that, again, these are easily achievable design strategies that is up to the project team to show how you're incorporating those. A cool example of this is in Seattle. And this park used to be a traffic median on a major city artery. And the neighborhood plan called for more parks. And so they decided to turn this median into a little pocket park. And so some of the ways that they incorporated universal access is the benches and seating are at all different heights, right? So that they can accommodate all different ages. The curb is also, it's only about 4 inches. So that allows bicyclists to, come and go easily. And then things like, the pedestrian ramp, they widened it to, from 4 feet to 6 and 8 feet in certain areas to make it more accessible.
So for inclusion, that has to do with, increasing opportunities for the local community and things like that. Next slide. So the requirements are that you have 2 just labeled organizations on your project team. All other organizations that actually they're really trying to push the just label. They want 5 more firms to do a self-assessment of just to determine if it makes sense for them. And then all projects must you can either meet inclusive contracting values. So a lot of public projects have inclusive values for design and construction for like minority-owned business, small women-owned business, that sort of thing. 10% needs to be for maintenance and 10% for workforce development, which is basically an apprentice program during construction. Or you can donate 0.1% of the total project cost to a regional community-based nonprofit focused on equity and inclusion. So for example, for a $5 million project, that would be a $5,000 donation. Next slide. So Ambient Energy has been a just labeled organization for going on 5 years now. We use the tool for employee recruitment and retainment, and we also aim to get more blue dots every time we resubmit. We have to resubmit every 2 years. But the nice thing is there's no silver, gold, platinum. It's just how many blue dots do you have? So we like that. And if you look on our website, it's on our hiring page actually. Next slide. So an example of inclusion would be this project, the Candida Building for Innovative Sustainable Design at Georgia Tech. The GC was Skanska, and they teamed up with a company called Georgia Works. And Georgia Works trains homeless men for jobs in the construction industry to mill salvage 2x4s that are actually purchased from local movie sets. And one individual that worked on the project went on to be a full-time hire at Skanska, which demonstrates the value of the skills learned on the project. Next.
All right, so our 9th imperative, beauty and biophilia. So this is getting teams to recognize and incorporate, this indoor-outdoor connection, and as human beings, our innate benefits that we get from being around nature and natural things, colors, shapes, sounds. This picture is our office. You can see we have a lovely green wall. We have some natural materials like wood. Creates a nice warm fuzzy feeling. So the requirements for this imperative, you'll need to host a full day biophilic design charrette. And that's with the whole project team. And the outcomes of that need to be both a biophilic framework and a plan. So this is basically documenting your charrette, what the team talked about, and how you decided what biophilic elements you were going to incorporate and your plan for doing that. The other thing for this requirement is to integrate public art and design features. I love that there's a requirement that you have to do something that's intended for human delight. So again, another fun sort of subjective requirement that your team gets to decide how you want to do that. For the biophilia charrette, ILFI does provide a guidebook. It's free to download on their website, and it's a really great how-to guide of how to do that full day charrette. It's got activities and templates and facilitation suggestions. So they really make this tangible. And then I also wanted to quickly show you some of the biophilic design elements. Now there's a lot of words on that chart, but you need to show that you're incorporating at least one aspect from each of those 6 categories. So if we look at one of them for an example, environmental features, you can do that in lots of ways, by having a specific color palette or a water feature, maybe having some airflow or plants, some views. So I wanted to show this just to say that it doesn't have to be a high-tech or costly design feature. It's probably things that you're already doing in your projects, and now it's kind of being more intentional about it. All right, and our last imperative, education and inspiration. So this is really to make sure that the great work that project teams are doing gets shared and can really act as a catalyst for other project teams to show that we can do this. So to meet this requirement, of course, you need to provide educational materials. They want to see a website, some signage, and also have an annual open day to the public. Another interesting requirement is that you need to have one Living Future accredited professional on the project team. So a cool example for this, I wanted to include Rocky Mountain Institute because they're local to Colorado. And I haven't actually been to this building myself, but I'm really excited to visit it. So, part of the purpose of this building was to be a living lab for what they call deep green strategies. And so when you go to their innovation center, they are totally transparent about how they contracted the building, designed, built, how it's operated, how it's commissioned. They want to give the public as much education and information as they can to show that this can be replicated. And I was looking at their website, it says that in the summertime they have, because of interest, they have tours about once a week, and then the rest of the year they tour it a couple times a month. So that's great for getting the word out to show again that these kind of strategies are possible.
So now we'll get into zero energy and zero carbon certifications. And the fees for these, for a certification for this program anyway, range from about $3,000 to $5,000 for most buildings. That would be buildings less than 250,000 square feet. They go up a little bit more after that. But most buildings that we work on aren't that big. So not a huge first cost to sort of verify that you actually are zero energy. And the requirements are that 100% of your building's energy needs on a net annual basis are supplied with on-site renewables with no combustion. So, this is a great for projects that have achieved that. It's sort of recognition for a project that's gone a long way to do that. Again, there are exceptions to this combustion rule. It's also possible to do some scale jumping here, as long as like for solar, for example, as long as you're not taking account of former systems, past solar systems you might have on your campus, or if it's not a power purchase agreement, I think that gets a little tricky. But if you do have a project like this, it's not too hard to get a certification. It is based on performance data. So, and you have to monitor and measure it through actual meters. If you have a electric vehicle, if you sub-meter that out, then you don't have to include that as part of your zero energy boundary. Next slide. And then there's a zero carbon certification as well, which includes both operational carbon and embodied carbon. And it's mostly focused on carbon. So for example, you don't have to be on site with your renewables. You could be off site with your renewables on a net annual basis. You also need to reduce your the energy, so reduced site energy consumption, 25% below ash rate. That's not super hard to do. Most of our projects try to get at least 20%, if not more, savings an ash rate. And this is a really low bar at 2010 for ash rate. So it'd be basically doing that plus either putting renewables on site or putting renewables off site with a purchase of carbon offsets. And then again, no combustion for new construction. And then the carbon part isn't too hard either. It's 10% reduction. You have to quantify all the carbon that your building's using, reduce it by 10%, and then you also, there is a requirement for 500 kilograms of CO2 per meter squared. So you have kind of a maximum carbon content of your building that I don't think is too hard to achieve. So I don't think that the zero carbon is nearly as hard to me to say the zero energy one, because that's 100% on site. Next slide.
All right, so we've gone through the 10 imperatives, and then Renee just showed all of you a couple other certifications that are possible. So let's say you decide to go for core. The certification process is pretty straightforward. You would, of course, register the project, and ILFI really encourages you to do that as soon as possible, even if you're thinking that you're going to do it. That's because they have a lot of resources and support that they can offer to project teams. When you register, you get a certain amount of calls with them and additional guides and all kinds of support to help everybody out. The program fees for core. So if your project is less than 250,000 square feet, it's going to range for somewhere between 7 and 10,000. Beyond 250,000 square feet, the fees go up because of the size of the project. And then for single family residents, it's a flat fee. I think it's, yeah, 4,500. They do have an optional, what they call a core ready audit. So let's say you're done with construction and you're not certified yet because you haven't had your performance period, but you want to market your project as core ready. That's an optional audit that you can do for that recognition. And then once the building is occupied, you would collect data for 12 months. So on all your imperatives, including how the ecosystems and ecology of the site is performing, your energy, your water, some other imperatives, you collect that data. And then you'll have an audit, a third-party site visit to make sure that you are meeting all of those imperatives, and then you get your award. So to wrap up, I see core as a call to action to our building industry, to design and construction and built environment professionals. At least in our line of work, we're often brought on for a pretty finite amount of time in the grand scheme of a building's life, right? So if we look at this bracket here, we're hired on to do services during design and construction. And then at some point, the building is occupied or the renovation's done, the community center opens, whatever your project is or your endeavor. And typically then we step away, right? And that's really when I would say a building starts to really live and breathe life. And so we start to see some effects and outcomes of our work over time. And we can see examples, where projects, they kind of maintain over time. We do things to make sure that they're going to continue as even as possible. And then unfortunately, we have some projects or strategies or components that are going to degrade over time. They're going to lose relevance. Core, I see core as a great pathway to reverse that downward, trajectory, and for us to really do good in the small amount of time that we have in the life of a project, in the life of a building. What is it that we can do to make sure that we're setting it up for that upward trajectory to improve relevance over time, to really truly regenerate the ecosystems, to be great for the local economy, great for the community, and in a way that's not just less bad, but that is truly doing good. So as Renee mentioned, we have 3 focus areas and a nice list here of all the ways that we can be plugged in to partner with you if you're interested in core, if you're interested in the zero energy or zero carbon or living building challenge for that matter. We can offer sustainability services from beginning to end, whether that's helping you through the rating system, facilitation, energy analysis, carbon calculations, water, commissioning, all that good stuff. And with that, I will wrap it up. And Johnny, I think you are going to help everybody open it up for a Q&A session.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much. I didn't see any questions come in, so now's your chance if you have any, but I had a few that I could get us rolling with. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, I think in my own line of work, we, as a building supply company, we talk to a lot of different people all over the place. We kind of get a sense of who's doing what. And there's certainly a lot of interest in living building challenge, but the kind of sense that it's like this just too big and too onerous of a thing that we'll ever be able to accomplish. And so I think the core idea certainly has, like some clear market there. But I'm wondering if within that, you're kind of seeing any particular, I don't know, building types or maybe those within the transects that you talked about, the locations that are sort of, you're seeing as maybe more the target, the most easily targeted demographic of building that would be, or maybe like the organization that's building it, or do you find it's just across the board broad appeal?
I can take a stab at that.
Sure.
Yeah, Renee, feel free to jump in. There are a lot of different project types that are, at least I can speak for Living Building Challenge, right? Core's new, and so we'll see who pops out for that. But for Living Building Challenge, you've kind of got your gamut. You've got single family homes. There's starting to be more office buildings with it, commercial facilities that are proving that this can be done. There's a lot of things like education centers and environmental centers, right? They want to definitely walk the walk and talk the talk. That's kind of the range of projects that I see. I don't know, Renee, if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think like net zero projects that already have that as a requirement, they're going to be easier to do that. Net zero projects with for example, off-grid homes, those are naturally good candidates because they might have a well, that makes it easier for water. And then just smaller projects are usually a little easier to do, 1-2-story buildings. But again, if the energy reduction has changed from 100% to 70%, that opens the doors to a lot more higher process load buildings, bigger buildings, things like that. So it's a little more easy for projects of all kinds to do it.
So we had a question come in. How is CORE modified for Colorado water laws?
Yeah, so I spoke to that a little bit. I think that projects need to submit why they can or cannot meet the requirements and really justify it. Ideally, there'll be more projects that are able to do systems similar to Denver Water in the future. I think we're still working on the laws and things like that to make it a little bit more easy to do. But because I know when we talk about what that Denver Water project did, there's a lot of interest in doing the same. But it's still a little bit challenging. That's why I think projects that are sort of smaller, like this Pikes Peak was a very unique environment. So it'll be a while before we really figure the water part out, unfortunately, still. But I think the more projects that keep trying and keep talking to ILFI about the exceptions that should be made to their rules, I think the more we'll get past.
Yeah, and there's also an option called hand printing. So this is allowed for affordable housing projects, but it's the idea that you kind of go as far as you can with a credit with an imperative requirement, and then to make up for the remainder that you can't do, you do some other activities either in your project or outside of your project that can make up for that sort of negative impact. And so that's another avenue I see as making a case to ILFI of why, because of our Colorado laws, that if a project is doing everything they can, short from breaking the law, that there's other goodwill activities to do. And I think it's worth going for.
Next question is, are most net zero projects new construction? And I guess I'd be interested in that just across the board for the different, kind of to follow up on what I was saying earlier, like if there is much of a possibility for like the hurdles too high for retrofit or most things that you see in all these different categories, new construction.
For zero net energy buildings, you can certainly do a zero net energy project on an existing building. It depends on lots of different things like the roof, age of roof, type of roof, how much available area you have. A lot of times we find that we might need more than the roof. And so to make it net zero, we might need a parking lot or we might need a parking garage deck. And so what available land area do you have? If it's existing building and you have a lot of area around that could even just be ground mounted PV, great. So there's not really a can you do net zero or not. It's more about, do you have any extra space other than just your roof? Not all projects can get net zero on their rooftop.
Yeah, unless you really drive down the energy use at the same time, I would assume. Mm-hmm. So are there municipalities or state governments recognizing this rating system like they do with LEED in many different jurisdictions? Or is there any uptake in that? And it says, example, Denver requires LEED Gold for all city projects.
That is a great question. And we've been talking to the city of Denver as well as the state of Colorado about expanding their list of options. Expanding their list of rating systems. I do know that King County in Seattle is one that actually requires either LEED Platinum or Living Building Challenge for all of their city buildings. So we like working on projects out there for sure. And I'm hoping that Denver will consider adopting LBC or LBC Core in the near future. But we have been talking to them about it for sure.
Yeah, the advocacy work we've been doing is really exciting. And I will also say that most municipal requirements, they'll usually have a caveat in there, right? Like LEED, Green Globes, or another comparable rating system. Mm-hmm. Of course, it'll make a difference if this is explicitly listed, but this is always an option to go to be more stringent, right, than what the codes are requiring.
Next question, what building methods and materials are on the way out? And if I could just throw in my 2 cents here, my company is all about getting people to stop using foam. So I'm just gonna put that one out here. No foam. But what do you guys think in terms of materials and methods on the way out?
Natural gas heating. Yeah, we're going towards electric. We're going electric. Electrification is the next trend, and it's here with Xcel Energy requiring 100% renewables to be 100% renewables by 2050. But I believe in Denver, only it's by 2030. So it's exciting. I've heard that Denver's going to adopt a 2027 requirement for zero net energy buildings for new construction. Pretty soon, like in this month maybe or next. So pretty exciting stuff. Helene, do you have any thoughts on the material side of things?
Yeah, it's easier for me to think of materials that are showing up more than those that are on their way out. But you know, there's some certainly mass timber we're starting to see pop up more, but really, you know, the materials industry, there's been a transparency movement going on for a number of years now. So I think what you're going to be seeing more, and therefore other materials going out, is materials that come with that, you know, nutrition label on it. You can think of it like that, that really where manufacturers are disclosing the environmental impacts of their products, how it's impacting the occupants, and really understanding the full life cycle impacts. Because consumers are starting to demand that, and part of that is driven by these rating systems and by policies. So that's sort of my backward answer to that one.
And to add to the natural gas, my favorite terminology that I've heard from across the country is from an architect in Philadelphia we work with often, from Bright Power Architecture. They use the term frack-free housing whenever they're convincing someone to pull the gas line, basically, from a retrofit. They mostly do retrofits, so they sell frack-free housing, and it goes over so well because they have a big issue with that in Pennsylvania as well.
Nice, I like that.
Yeah, I know. That one's free to use for anybody who wants to use it. One more question, or a couple more questions here, and then we do stay on the line because we do have the raffle winner, and you got to be on to get it. So how does a smart power grid play into the net zero construction?
Well, I think that one thing that's going to be happening is we're going to use our smart grid for our electric vehicles to reduce demand. We're not there yet with our current utility provider policies, but I think pretty soon we can look at our electric vehicles as a source for reducing demand when we get that smart building, not only the smart grid, but the smart building system to respond to the smart grid. So I think that's going to be a trend that we're already seeing in Vermont with Vermont Green Power, for example. And as all of the utility providers in the nation start to adopt these 100% renewables policies, how are they going to do that without taking advantage of all these batteries in people's cars and batteries in buses? It's going to be really hard for them to do that without taking advantage of everything they can. So I do see that as a trend in the electric grid industry.
Yeah, and also I think starting to pop up more are smart, maybe not whole smart cities, but smart developments, smart communities, smart neighborhoods. So not just incorporating what you would think of as smart technologies, but trying to rely solely on a microgrid, right? So having an agreement with the major utility provider to allow to have those microgrids in those communities. I've definitely seen some more of those popping up.
New buildings are more easily managed in terms of their performance. How can we incentivize and encourage renovations, remodels to incorporate these 10 imperatives? We have a lot of bad old construction sites out there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. New buildings are a lot easier. There are a lot of incentives through your local utility to encourage energy efficiency and high performance design. I understand they're going to start incorporating more. Xcel Energy is going to be incentivizing a lot more heat pump technologies, which will help as well. I think that we can't just electrify and go all to electric heat, right? We need heat pumps. So that's another trend in our industry, is that we need to figure out, if we're going to go all electric, how to do it in a smart way. Heat pumps are a lot more efficient than regular electric heating. So I think, and to incentivize, I think you should talk to the city that you're in about, are there any city incentive programs potentially out there? But definitely your local utility. We always like to go to the desire.org website. They have a great list of incentives by state, by city, and that's probably the most comprehensive website you can go to learn about all the various incentives out there. There's also a lot of federal tax incentives, and the solar tax incentive is still going on, I believe. there's also a lot of good solar electric vehicle tax credits. So you want to take advantage of those as well if you're in that market.
Yeah, and I would add, aside from, you know, incentives, like really helping to encourage the building industry and your projects for that matter to do these 10 imperatives. You know, there is so much research out there. If you want to just, you know, money talks, right? People are going to want to know, no matter how much of an environmentalist you are, do-gooder, you know, what your return on investment is going to be. And that's the great thing about, you know, not just core, but a lot of other sustainability strategies. The technology to do this exists, right? It's a matter of doing it on your project. And so there's tons of research out there and data to show your return on investment on these technologies, and even things like, you know, biophilic design. There's lots of research of why diversity is beneficial and financially worth it. So,
Helene, this might be a good time for you to do your pitch for the newsletter article you're about to write.
Yeah, so speaking of incentives and encouraging you to do this, we're doing some research right now in-house to really put together some more quantitative data on not the return on investment on core as a whole, because it's new, so that doesn't really exist. But like I said, there's a lot of research on return on investment, health impacts, well-being, et cetera, on all of these strategies and technologies. And so we'll be putting that together. And so I would say look out for it from us in our newsletter.
So if you don't get our newsletter because you haven't heard of us before, and this is the first time you've ever seen us do a presentation, please write down Helene or I's email address, and we'll make sure you get on our newsletter. It's just quarterly.
Yeah, I think the return on investment thing, I think it certainly gets brought up a lot. It's a question that gets brought up a lot, and people are very interested in it. It has obviously, you know, valid, you know, something that needs to be explored and talked about. But I also find that in our work, a lot of times, like my company focuses on passive house certification, and to be completely honest, since we're all in the same group here, return on investment probably will never work out, you know, and so I find that it's actually quite helpful when we have those conversations. What we usually bring it back to is the fact that you're just getting something better, and like you can flip it around really and be like, what's the return on investment on your marble countertops? Like, what's the return on that? Why are you doing it if you're not getting a return on investment on those marble countertops? You know, like that oftentimes the answer is no. There isn't one. You're doing it because it's better for you. To be honest, like it's more comfortable. It's a better thing. It's a greater place to be in a room full of plants. You know, like it's just that.
Yeah,
and I don't know. That's my 2 cents on that.
There's certainly a host of more qualitative, right, returns, and I think it's important to consider those, you know, when you're having those conversations. But you know, passive house in particular too, some people might really be encouraged by resiliency factors with that, right? A lot of the strategy, I mean, not just passive house, but stuff in core and other strategies, it's security, right? So there are developers investing in some of these technologies and more progressive goals because they know that in a natural disaster or a power outage or whatever, that their real estate is going to be safe and be more attractive.
Mm-hmm. And so I think we'll wrap it there. So thank you so much for being with us, for joining. Take care, everyone. We'll see you later.